everyone. So our talk here about scaling 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. So these are the browser script management requirements. And most importantly, how do large enterprises get there? What's their journey to reach that compliance? I'm Jeff Zittimer, Senior Director of Product Management at Human Security. We have a product that addresses these very requirements. And I have with me Eric.
Yeah, I'm Stephen Eric Fisher, I'm the Senior Cybersecurity Risk Expert for Walmart Global Tech.
All right, we're basically going to have two parts. In the first part, I will talk you through basically how did these become PCI requirements, and then I'll hand it off to Eric to discuss that large enterprise journey. And with that, so every security vendor presentation needs to start with a bit of a scared straight moment. So this is ours. You do not want your company's name obviously making headlines for the wrong reasons. And this is sort of what kicked everything off. Mage card attacks from around 2015, but then really became well known in 2018. The British Airways hack was a mage card that was behind the £183 million GDPR fine that they got, because that was a privacy violation as well. But since then, these attacks have kept going on. The latest Verizon data breach incident report also highlights that they still see this attack pattern a lot. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what makes these scripts a lucrative attack surface, why are attackers there, why do you need to manage it? So first off, we need to understand what modern websites are. They are no longer these static pages that just basically deliver text and a few images from your server to the end user. They are highly dynamic. They rely on a lot of scripts running in there to really do everything from just making the site itself possible, giving you analytics of knowing what's on the site, making your developers' lives easier because they can reuse stuff, and then everything related really to your business and promotion, advertising, social media integrations, chat and support, and of course also that payment script. If you're using an iframe with a payment script there, through a third-party payment service provider there, that too comes in through an iframe, through a script. And the other thing about your scripts is that they also don't develop everything themselves in that one script that your developers may have included. They pull other scripts that are third parties themselves, and those third parties could rely on other third parties. So in reality, you have this massive tree that could have been kicked off where you have 100 or more scripts on there, but you thought you only added 10. Now the issue with these scripts are that they load dynamically from across the internet. The browser is getting those directly from those third parties. They never go through you. You never have an opportunity to actually see what's inside them. So you really don't know what you're going to get, which also means that they're basically bypassing everything you have in place for security with your DevSecOps pipeline that you worked so hard. They don't follow that path of everyone else. They kind of come in through the sites, track all this smut there that you're going to want to keep out of there or clean up after it happens. And so what's the problem with this? So once the script is there on your browser page, it basically can do anything. It can read anything, it can change anything in the experience, it can take the user to a very different site, to your attacker's site to input their information. They can read what the user is inputting on any sensitive form, and more. And yet, despite these challenges, as of a couple of years ago, 92% of companies did not have full visibility into what these third parties are doing on their sites, and only 30% were at least aware enough to say that maybe I shouldn't just trust my third parties because I don't really know that they're doing what I think they're doing. But hopefully, we get that awareness up to 100% as part of the PCI requirement, or at least this session today. And so with that, into that gap, that's why I made it into PCI with these two requirements. So we'll cover those very quickly. So the goal, of course, is to protect that cardholder data from these browser scripts and other client-side based attacks. And then in a nutshell, 6.4.3 is about script management. You need to confirm they're authorized, you need to assure their integrity, and I would have put this bullet first, you need to maintain the inventory of what are all my scripts running there with written justification as to why they need to be there. 11.6.1 is about confirming that whatever controls you put in place in 6.4.3 and whatever changes happen dynamically are on top of those. To an extent, it assumes that you're using headers as part of your security, and you probably should, though it won't give you all of your security. And so this is where you ensure that those haven't been removed or even added maliciously or accidentally. Now let's talk through a little bit what are some of the things that you can do. So first no-brainer is just avoid cardholder data. Obviously you want to accept payments, so you can't quite do that, but you can get pretty close if you use a third-party payment service provider, if you don't have another good business reason why you want to touch the credit card information yourself, and that will help a lot with both security and compliance, but it will not free you of this obligation. There's some confusion out there, but no, the SAQA actually clarifies that really well, and we hope that the council will put out a little more clarification. Next top technique, right, is obviously avoid scripts. No scripts, no problem. Right? And when you look at your scripts, you're going to find they fall into three categories. You're going to have some developer tried something 7 years ago, left 5 years ago, we're afraid to touch it on the one extreme. And on the other extreme, you're going to have the very obvious, this is my payment script itself from a third-party payment service provider. So the ones on this list definitely have to stay. The ones on this other list, here's the opportunity now. You have to clean it up. You have to get to the bottom of each of those and remove it if it doesn't need to be there. But then you're going to have the ones in the middle that may be a bit of a standoff between, okay, how critical is this to the business or to payments versus the peace of mind that you want, knowing that you just don't have that attack surface exposed with them having access to everything. Some of the other requirements that are specifically mentioned in the PCI doc itself, so CSP and SRI, sort of tried, tested. They're proactive, they're free, but in reality, they should be part of your security story being multi-layered, but realistically, they're very hard to manage effectively. Next up is synthetic scanners. So they're great as far as giving you that inventory, at least they probably won't see 100% of it, but depending on how often you run it, they may see a lot of it, but scripts change all the time, and in between that sampling and depending on how you set it up, you may not see everything. They do have the other advantage that they are completely unintrusive, so the developers who own the site don't even need to know that you're running this scanner, which definitely has its advantages, less dependency in a large organization, for example. The problem with them, as I said, they're incomplete. They're not going to give you the full picture ever. It's a very small sample rate. They're very easy for attackers to bypass because just like we slow down if we know there's a speed trap, a script can know that they're not running on a real user and then just not do the malicious behavior that they would have otherwise done. There's a lot of effort to set them up and maintain them, unless you have like a full managed service where somebody else keeps fixing that user journey, that checkout journey, whenever like you change your page or developers change your page or something and that breaks, and somebody else is managing it, but then obviously you have to pay for that. And the bottom line is it gives you monitoring only. So now I have this information that my script that is there to ensure that I can properly convert all my users and they're not abandoning their carts. Okay, I know now that they are exfiltrating payment card information. Now, do I justify and authorize that? Because at least I have a contract with them? Or do I completely shut them off, but then how do I actually track sort of how my conversion is going and that the experience on the site is good and whatever my marketing dollars are spent well? And that's where only this third category could really help you with. And I'll start with the disadvantage. It says another JavaScript, so it's part of that inventory that you need to manage. But it is the script to rule all scripts. So it's right there on your end user sessions. It just sends back all the information that it sees as far as none of the actual sensitive information. It doesn't care about the credit card numbers itself or username or password, but just the information about what are scripts doing in there. So you'll see all the scripts that are running, all of the things those scripts are doing that you may care about. And what's better, because it's not only monitoring, you can precisely block the part you don't like. So in that funnel conversion analytics script, you need it there, the CMO is not going to let you take it off, but you can block its ability very surgically to read that credit card information that you don't want it reading, and so you can be also happier that you've massively reduced the risk that it can bring to your site. With that, let me hand it off here to Eric to talk about the journey.
Thanks, Jeff. So every enterprise, from a small organization to a large organization, have respective challenges, some advantages, some disadvantages, but neither are completely easy. Large enterprise organizations are actually not just one thing. They're an amalgamation of multiple smaller components that often compete for resources, demands, have their own components, their own stakeholders, and it requires a lot more orchestration. So one thing that's consistent between small and large enterprises is that mistakes in your path along this journey are going to be costly if you err up front. So my hope is that throughout some of this presentation, you're going to find some of the experiences we're conveying here will help you in your own journey to go over and help reduce mistakes and complete that on time. So there's always work to do. Whether it's checking a box or understanding why there's a box to check in the first place, when you're looking at a problem, consider the journey, the origin. Where are you at? Where does your organization exist right now in time? And then the destination. Where do you need to be and at what point? And ultimately, the path that's going to connect those two pieces. That is going to require you to bring the various stakeholders to that destination in time. So a little brief history. Scripts are nothing new for 2025. They've been around for a while. They did start gaining traction in around 2017, 2018. There were over 800 sites that were impacted by e-commerce skimming. And there was a following year in 2019, over 17,000 domains were impacted from one CDN source. So the modern thing is that a browser is no longer static text, as Jeff talked to earlier on. It's actually a dynamic application engine, is what the browser is. And it's consuming multiple parts from multiple sources to go over and execute that, including your own code. That's often misunderstood right now. Your site is actually more app than it is text. And that is installed from various entities, not just your own. So a lot of security tools, teams, compliance components, and knowledge still view that as being static text and don't understand the dynamic nature of that, and also understand that there's a trusted supply chain behind that. So that itself is your site's nexus. Ultimately, it's the interconnected parts, along with the causation and chain that consists of what that final product is. And some entities have a head start on that. They understand that, they've had that for a while, and they've been working with it, and some don't. So looking back, 2017, 2018, we had the rise of the e-skimmers. They started really gaining traction in the industry, and we started looking at threats, vectors, and the technology being used in those attacks. Consulted internal experts, cross-domain SMEs, and determined, are we exposed? If we're exposed, what does that mean? What would it take for that exposure to be exploited? And if that was, could we go over and detect that? Could we respond to that? That started increasing awareness and started aligning stakeholders and processes back then. It turns out that fixing an end user's browser and the application engine that runs on that is considerably harder than securing your own internal source code. And that is one of the problems because engines and languages didn't really facilitate controlling different levels of privileges. And they also lack support consistent support across different devices, operating systems, browsers, and different pieces behind that. So if you look at it, native security within the browser's app engine was really too inconsistent to consistently apply to every user experience, making it challenging. What did exist back then was the ability for us to actually monitor what the end user was seeing. And then from that, we can go over and understand if that experience was what we expected it to be. So that end state allowed us to monitor ultimately for changes. And keep in mind, reality is often not what you want to do in the future, but what you can do now and how you can build forward. Ultimately, you're going to have to evaluate and understand the design of your website, its nexus regarding payment security. I need to understand and engage experts that know the limitation of code methods and the way that your site is built in order to determine the blast radius of impact for your payment components. And that ultimately is going to drive your chain of causation and what other scripts are there. You also need to be able to identify the trusted and untrusted partners that are part of that site as you start identifying scripts and where they source from across the internet. One of the key things there is understanding if that script needs to be a part of the page. Does it need to be within that security envelope? Does it need to be somewhere else? Does that function serve as a business need, or is it something that can be put into a different area or contained? That's going to help you identify a script flow, where you need to go over and have scripts that are specifically focused for business areas, but not focused for payment areas. There's likely to be a lot of discussion there between various stakeholders. They're going to have the knowledge and perspective of what they want to do for the business, why those scripts are there, and then coordinating that with security and compliance. If you do need to tool up, you're going to wind up having a lengthy process between evaluating products. Does it fit to the function? How's that going to impact our site? How are we going to be able to go over and manage that? What type of team is going to do that? And how is it going to integrate with our existing staff and security processes? All those are going to take considerable time off the plate. So definitely when you move into implementation in your journey, when you want to go over and make sure you're layering security features. CSP SRI, you're going to look at potentially explicit behavior monitoring or anomaly process resolutions. All those things may exist in your organization now and need to be coordinated to come up with a good later result. Laying the groundwork that builds that pathway and gives you those indicators of compromise or threat attacks, and bringing those into the channels that move into things like security operations centers is where you can go over and benefit from that tooling and the overall compliance process. And knowing what scripts and code need to be there, and moving from untrusted to trusted with your vendors, and finding a partnership there. You'll find that a lot of third parties are increasingly become aware of this requirement and also allow you to go over and implement change gating with their own scripts on the third party side, where you can go over and allow those scripts to go over and be released in your own change cadence in your own change gate. And finally, once you've got your destination, you can go back and look at how to improve. One thing that's easy to do, but does take time, is looking at the site architecture. Better work within the limitations of what the code capacity is and your site's intentions. That will allow you to go over and produce ultimately better application segmentation. It's something very similar that we saw back in point of sale earlier on. Point of sale used to be very broad, have a lot of payment functions that were built into the overall application. Eventually those became segmented, isolated, and moved into specialty components. The website needs to follow that same pattern to go over and reduce the scope of the Nexus and the impact. This can be an involved conversation. You're going to need to have cross-domain experts, and you're going to need to understand the languages involved, the technology involved, as well as security and the threat landscape to make sure that not just the initial product is corrected, but also perpetually throughout the life cycle of that application, you maintain that. And finally, look for opportunities to go over and integrate and automate. As you bring these systems online, as you're looking for this compliance data, you're going to get a very specific set of actionable data that if you pipeline it properly to the right people, are going to wind up with qualified events. You're going to be able to go over and explain security risk context, potentially changes where one script used to go over and accept address components, and now that script is accessing payment fields. So that winds up being something that's very actionable, provides a good indicator of compromise, which can help out your security operations team. So some key takeaways. New page requirements 643 and 1161 address an important security gap, and that effective implementation can be challenging. If you haven't started yet, it's definitely something you want to be understanding what the nexus of your application is and how to deliver that. So large enterprises especially should start as soon as possible with scoping and aligning those stakeholders and processes. Ultimately, we hope that you're able to engage the right expertise, leveraging multiple layers of technical and process controls that will give you a best benefit and the return on your investment in compliance. So with that, I think we're good.
Thank you very much, everyone.